Welcome back. This is Africa News Network. You're watching us here from Channel 405, live from the Midrand Studios in Johannesburg. Take a look at your stories, Dan. The latest employment equity report paints a bleak picture in transformation in corporate South Africa. At least 68% of top management positions are still occupied by whites 23 years after democracy.
Labour Minister Mildred Willifan says the report mirrors the glaring lack of appetite for transformation by big corporates. According to Willifan, over 50% of the 192 firms listed on the JSE were referred for prosecution for not complying with employment equity legislation.
Meanwhile, COSATU says this does not come as a surprise because the penalties are not hefty enough to act as a deterrent.
It is concerning that there are just too many JSE-listed companies that are completely ignoring the law. It is this state of affairs that leaves us no option but to consider drafting in harsher consequences for non-compliance. It's time to up the ante, and this may include promulgating the stick and/or punitive sections and chapters of the Employment Equity Act, which were initially excluded from promulgation. This will give the Act real teeth and will bite where it hurts the most, and that is designated employers' revenue. As the department, we are going to promulgate Section 53 in line with Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, precisely because designated employers, it's easier to budget for paying the fines rather than to implement the Employment Equity Act. And as the department, we have already started the discussions with the Department of Treasury and also the South African Revenue Services, so that when it comes to the issuing of certificates, compliance certificates, we will be able to say these are the companies that are not complying and therefore they should not get the work from the government.
The African National Congress says transformation is not optional. The ANC said in the report that paints a picture of inequalities perpetrated by those who are hostile to South Africa's transformation. The party called on government to demonstrate greater urgency and decisiveness in dealing with errant employers. It said compliance with employment equity and affirmative action legislation is not an optional extra for companies, adding that many corporates pay lip service to racial and gender transformation of their management structures.
The ANC concluded that radical economic transformation demands that the current exclusionary economic order must be dismantled.
Failing to comply with the employment equity laws of this country, they should be blacklisted. They should be barred from doing business with government. We really feel that currently they have no reason to comply because government has normalized this abnormal situation. What is currently happening is that these companies are not just emboldened, they are actually defiant. They are fighting back. You would have realized that they are actually funding lobby groups like the Free Market Foundation and other lobby groups that are just not prepared to engage on these issues of employment equity and affirmative action.
And the report raises the following questions. Shouldn't non-compliant firms be barred from conducting business with government? And have penalties become a convenient escape route for ducking the transformation objectives?
So to discuss this, therefore, in detail and find out what are we doing wrong and is corporate South Africa holding us at capture, as it were. And so we want to find out why transformation or the wheels of transformation are so slow. We're very happy to have Professor Sipho Seape, who is a political analyst, with us here in studio. And obviously, Professor, this is a sensitive issue, and sometimes perhaps we beat about the bush and not actually face the elephant in the room. And I'm not talking about me. So do you think corporate South Africa is doing enough to address transformation?
No, I think it is doing enough not to address transformation. And I think what we also need to understand is also a number of side shows that we get engaged in. All these court battles that are directed at the president are aimed at making sure that we're diverted from talking about the economy.
Yeah.
And when you look at the picture is so bleak. It simply says black people are still outsiders in the economy. And yet a lot of energy is spent on things that are irrelevant. And that is deliberate. It's not an accident. So if we understand that, then we'll focus on the things that matter.
Yeah.
So what also the report shows is almost gives a vindication to the narrative of radical economic transformation.
Yeah.
And it's consistent also with the president's justification of it. Remember, one of the things that the president said, and also what the ANC said, is to say, look at the composition of management. And you'll find that predominantly and disproportionately you find white males. Look at the management.
68%.
Exactly. Look at the management. You look at control. You look at the land. You get the same picture. But you cannot be part of the majority and be onlookers in your own country.
But that's the thing. Why has it not, or that stick, if you like, approach been implemented sooner? Because we regurgitate the same thing. We're obsessed with statistics and quotas, and very little else changes. So maybe an idea is that government needs to stop doing business with big corporates that are non-transformative.
I think that is a first step. But you must also understand that we also come from a situation where we have not dealt with white supremacy. And I need to explain this very well, because white supremacy is not advanced only by white people. It's also advanced by black people. It's in the same way that patriarchy works, where if you have women who are 100 in a room and there are 2 men in the room, and if you want to elect a leader, the women will choose the men to advance what they think are their interests. So you also find black people who will also advance white interests and be so happy to say, I'm the only black person around here. So we must address that. And the issue of the stick, it's also because we don't take power seriously. Power must also mean the ability to make a change. So here you had the law that allows you to bar all these companies that are non-compliant. So if you are not going to touch them on their, what you call it, in terms of business, I mean, the penalties, they'll pay them from the business that they do with the government. So it is correct. Actually, it should not even be a suggestion. It should be something that we need to do as in government, to say, if you don't comply, there's no business with government.
Yeah, she's with she's a labor analyst from Creative Voodoo Consulting. When we look at those particular numbers, one thing is very, very concerning, and that's the female representation, both in executive and in management as well. Why is it that this cannot be changed fast enough in terms of gender equality as well? We're not just looking at transformation, but we're looking at even female participation in the real heart of the economy.
Hi, it's Life. One of the challenges that, it's actually not a challenge, I call it a systematic refusal. Yes, the word just ran out of my mind. But the point is that we are seeing the private sector constantly rejecting and refusing to transform. And it's not just now that it's happening. We have seen through the release of the CEE report over the years that there is a determined effort in resisting programs of redress and of ensuring that blacks are included in a corporate structure. But not only that even when transformation is supposed to happen and it's supposed to take women up into executive position, there is that resistance also of blocking black women executive into ascending to position of power. And it speaks to a structural setup of the legacy that is found in South Africa's corporate sector of apartheid that excluded black people, but that was brutally excluding black women.
So, Mamokgethi, it's Cindy here. I mean, why is it, in your view, that corporate South Africa still sees transformation as a form of punishment, as opposed to an imperative to this inclusive economy that evades us?
Well, they see it as such because they are refusing to one, have a common vision with government towards what one can call a common vision for the country. Two, they are with determined effort resisting transformation, because to them it is going to be to mean the dilution of the private sector. And more importantly, in the South African history context, we have a private sector that is hardened, that not only was oppressive towards workers. Now, for the private sector to see workers ascending, or those who it deemed as mere workers becoming executive in the same level of them, it cannot have that. And this, perhaps for me, signals. I always argue that each year the Department of Labor releases the Employment Equity Report, and here and there is progress, but the rest, it is a slow pace of transformation. And I argue that perhaps we must move past talking. The Department of Labor and various other government departments must come up with a way of how are we going to ensure that transformation imperatives are met by the private sector, and what measures are we going to put in place to monitor? Not only that, how are we going to hit them where it hurts? To say, if you are a company that does business in South Africa and you are not transforming, you have no business doing business here. The transformation imperatives of the country are these. They are not negotiable. The executive transformation at an executive level are not negotiable, and they stand. And until we do that as a country, until the Department of Labor does that, South Africa is going to always be stagnant, and we are not going to move forward. We will be talking 5 years from now, we will be saying there is still 56 or 60% of women in leadership. And for me, there is a challenge that we are talking as South Africa, we are extending hand as government, but I think private sector must now begin to be penalized on refusing and resisting transformation.
Kgaitsedi, just the last one. What is sad for me about these numbers is the fines that were paid. And you always hear that we say corporate South Africa does not want to invest. Here they are prepared to pay in refusing to transform. They are prepared to actually lose money in order not to be able to transform. Surely that is a slap in the face for government in their efforts to try and transform the economy of the country.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's critical that the transformation talk is back on the agenda in broader government language and in broader government areas, because I do think we cannot stop talking about transformation in South Africa. I think especially within the workplace, because the workplace was used as a steel rod on the back of black workers to keep them down and to delay the progress. So now that we are 23 years into democracy, we shouldn't be asking private sector, why is it that out of your 20 executives, there is no black women? And even more, perhaps for me, what is more frustrating is that the corporate private sector says we cannot find enough qualified people to fill in this post yet. Stats SA number shows us that, and the Department of Labor's number shows us that the majority of unemployed graduates are black. So for me, that's a challenge. On the one hand, you have a private sector that say we cannot find qualified people. On the other, you have numbers, verified numbers that are quantified that says the highest number of unemployed graduates happen to be black.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there, Kgaitsedi. That's Mamokgethi Malupiane, the labor analyst with the Creative Voodoo Consulting. On the line is Chris Malimaja, Sanko Gauteng Provincial Chairperson. Re Malimaja, thanks so much for your time. Good evening to you. Just looking at these numbers, again, it begs the question as to why corporate South Africa refuses to transform. But also, secondly, that we're chasing moving targets, it seems. There's either GEAR or one other policy document or position that government is taking. Before that is implemented, something else comes along. Do you think that could be the case as well?
No, thanks, and good evening to the viewers at home and wherever they are. Let me take this opportunity to say, in many cases, the mistake that we did and we failed to trace exactly where lies the problem. Our negotiated democracy made us to leave some of very important aspects behind. Today we find ourselves where this private sector, they're doing as they wish, because, to be honest, I don't see reasons why these people we negotiate for them to accept transformation. I really don't see those reasons. Because if you don't comply, I think one and the very same thing that needs to be taken is to ensure that you don't do any business with us. We don't do any business with the government. And it must not necessarily be the private sectors alone that get punishment. The ministers involved, because each and every year we go to the ANC Lekgotla, we go to the government Lekgotla, resolutions are taken that this year we are going to embark on a radical transformation of all government sectors. But you find that at the end of the day, we get this kind of reports. Then how do you go and tell people that this particular sector does not want to comply, yet at the very same time this particular sector is busy getting money, is making profit out of the state, and forgetting that this was just a simple amended act to simply say we want transformation in the workplaces. With one soul to achieve, to ensure that we do away with the unfair discrimination and the implementation of affirmative action. Then how do we say we're going to achieve that if we still find such resistance, at the meantime paying the very same people who deny us? The question will be, who are these private sectors? Why are they so adamant that they're so defiant? And they get sponsored by the very same people that we think they're supposed to ensure that they comply?
You know, I think from a consumer's point of view, if we now take it beyond the shelves of what is in the grocery stores, the whole value chain from ownership, management, who the suppliers are, the distributors, is something that we need to look closely at, because you can call for so many black people in a workspace, yes, but there's other imperatives, Chris, that would then make us perpetually dependent on corporate South Africa, as opposed to being able to manufacture our own goods and services.
I don't think, Cindy, we will be correct to necessarily say they will be able to depend on them to become the supplier. But what needs to be corrected in this way, have we achieved the intended objective of this act? And how do we achieve that? And if we don't necessarily focus on it, we will keep complaining and say, you go to all levels, starting from top management, senior management, you'll find that the whites keep dominating. Obviously, for a mere fact that they keep dominating, that tells you that the economy is still in the hands of the whites. And that alone, it means they've got the right to decide to us what is it that they need to be done at what time. Yeah. That is where they are going to tell you, at this time, we can only just take you from this position to this level as a feeder. And in that particular process, I'm telling you there are a number of aspects that are involved. You will find that it encourages corruption, because you need to negotiate to go up. You need to negotiate to be taken into that position. Nepotism can be part. All these things, bribe can also be included. But I'm saying, as long as we don't implement it radically so, as we'll be saying we want a radical economic transformation, or everything in South Africa after 20 years in democracy, do we need a radical change and a radical implementation of whatever transformation we are intending to gain?
Yeah, Professor, bringing it back to you, what's interesting for me, and obviously with my background, is you're told that the channel has a perspective, a particular narrative that they're trying to channel, but it is very hard to ignore the numbers and the consistency of the numbers that show that there is definitely somebody who's saying, listen, we are not prepared. In actual fact, we're prepared to pay the price, if need be, for us not to transform. What makes me even more sad is that the Johannesburg Stock Exchange plays a vital role in this particular one, because even the executive of the JSE itself is not reflecting that of what we're trying to achieve. These are minimals. When we talk about these targets, these are bare minimums, which the companies in actual fact themselves set themselves up for. And they failed in that, and they're prepared to even pay penalties for that. What do we do as a country? How do we make people realize the importance of transforming this economy so that the majority of the people of this country can really not have degrees and then have to go to the traffic light to ask for a job?
Well, I think the sooner we sober up, the better. What you're dealing with here is white interest. black people talk, white people act. Those who have economic power make sure that they use that power, and that power is to exclude black people. You may have the flag, but they have the economy. So we spend more time trying to win them over, trying to say this, but they're not interested in that. So unless you use the political power that you have, and you make sure that within the law, you also punish those who are non-compliant. What we have actually done, we have behaved like fools. We tell them to do this, and they don't do it, but we still do business with them. So that is the problem. So, and if you behave like that, why should they take you seriously? So that is number one. The second issue is, you also see what is most shocking is the report also shows that when you also look at education, higher education, you have black students who graduate to unemployment. And as some of my white friends say, that you'll struggle to find a white man with matric, but you can find without a job. A white man with matric will always have a job, but you'll find a number of PhDs without jobs who are black. Precisely because white folks are very clear about the white interest and they'll protect it. So I do think that 23 years later, it is not possible for us to continue this way. But you should also blame us, this generation and the generation before us, because I think we have we suffer from having taken this tranquilizing pill of gradualism, that things take time. And what you see with young people, they are actually beginning to show the impatience that we are unable to show. I mean, remember, it is young people who made sure that we remove all these offensive statues, while some of us worked in those institutions and were very comfortable even taking pictures with those offensive statues. So young people today are showing the way that we are not going to talk about freedom and liberation for as long as we are outsiders. So even the notion of the born frees, they say, where is that freedom? So I do think that these statistics, and government must take them, because like you say, there's the issue of consistency. You go back to the last report, the one before that, it's the same story. Yeah. But what it shows is that we are willing to pay, but we'll make sure that there's no transformation. And you cannot get the same result doing the same thing. So the problem is government that has state power and is unable to use that state power to make sure that it gets its own results.
Yeah, I mean, it goes even deeper than that. You'll hear professionals, black professionals being discriminated on in terms of promotions or even salary disparities. So it's not just in terms, of changing the color or the complexion of the workforce. It's also how you are treated, preferential treatment being given to your white counterparts. So how do you, as a professional finding yourself in that environment, try and influence change?
Well, I mean, the first starts with the mind.
But without losing your job.
Without losing your job.
No, but you remember that one of the things that we chose not to do is also to put the text that will liberate black people's minds. We are not reading even texts like Arado Adalai, the Frantz Fanon, and even our own constitution to make sure that the people know that they have these rights. But most importantly, we made sure, we suffer from seeking white affirmation. And Cindy, if you continue to look up to me, you leave me with no choice but look down on you. And this is what has been happening in the last 23 years.
But the problem is, it's very hard, Prof. If you take the history of African people in this country and where we come from, and then all of a sudden you get a job, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, look, man, where are your kids going to school? What are you driving? You're still driving that old car. That pressure that comes onto you, you say, here's a new car, here's even if I'm far more qualified and I'm able to do the job, but the fact that now I'm driving a Land Rover and I live in a suburb in Johannesburg now gives me some sort of status within community. So I'm prepared to swallow my pride, to swallow my right as a black professional.
You're prepared to sell your soul. You see, we must go back to we are children of people who liberated us, people who were also faced with that possibility of going to jail. And the least they ask from us is not to go to jail, is not to die, but to be principled. And what it also means that we should have the courage to decolonize our minds. At the moment, most of us are very colonized. Actually, as I say, if you look at some of the institutions of higher learning where you had black people, you saw a regression. Instead of having more black people coming in, you found black people driving others so that they assume a sense of being special. So there is a challenge also among the qualified professionals who are qualified only to advance the interest of white interest, not the interest of black people.
All right,
so we need to have that discussion.
In closing, Professor Siepe, are we saying now to our viewers, you not only to be conscious of what's going on, but to also be active in reforming or changing the status quo?
Yeah, first of all, what we need to do, we were not liberated by other people, we liberated ourselves. So we need to do the same thing economically, that the answer lies with us and not in another person. This is why the mushrooming of groupings that talk about economic transformation and liberation is very important, because we can no longer continue, and the young people are actually showing the way, and we are our generation and before us, we are the generation that has been so thoroughly subdued.
Yeah.
Apartheid has done such a good job on us that we will spend, look at how much money and how much effort we spent in talking about the president, instead of talking about the exclusion of so many people in the economy.
You know, Chris, I just wanted you to close and tell us what should we do to make sure that this does not happen again in the next generation?
Thanks. I think the only thing that needs to be done is to allow the radical transformation of all government things to prevail. Because for the mere fact that where we are standing, everything we have to negotiate, everything we have to first ask for permission, indeed we are going to let the upcoming generation suffer for the consequences that we are voluntarily doing it. Because whether you like it or not, I like you or not, political power without economic power, it stunts growth. So in this case, how do we expect economy to grow, whereas it is still driven by the few individuals? I think as a civic movement, we are much more worried about what we are seeing. We are calling upon the government to ensure it enforces this transformation at all costs.
We're going to have to leave it there. That's Chris Malimaja, the Sanko Gauteng provincial spokesperson, or rather the chairperson, and Professor Sipho Siepe in the studio with us, as always, much appreciated. And we'll take a quick ad break. We'll see you